Today we're looking at Diamine Ochre. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Diamine Ochre is a brown ink, and to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples, I put the ink into a different pen for a day, I then put it into a Lamy All-Star to take my notes for this video. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. And up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is this very light brown is kind of khaki brown across the bottom, and it pushes its way up. We see reds and some darker browns at the top. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And what we see is that brown that was across the bottom is much darker, much more there. We really see that line, although it does push up some. We then see some of that same light brown, some of the same reds, but less of the dark brown at the top, which makes me feel like, given time, the darker brown was really seeping into the filter paper. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. Now, I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it basically handles it pretty well. It did go from an extra fine to about a medium in writing, and what we see is the large H has a slight bit of feathering that really starts to occur on it. However, all of that writing is very clean and legible. I wouldn't have a problem having some of that feathering have occurred because I could read everything if I highlighted in my notes. Water lifted up all of the darker tones of the ink, but left that lighter tone. The lighter tone we saw in the second chromatography, that light brown, it really did stay there. Pen Flush did everything that water did and a little more, and that little more might be just enough. We do start to see the beginnings, the hope of the white coming through from the paper. We can just barely in those really light areas see some of the dots of the Rhodia dot pad. It really makes me say that given more than 30 seconds of Pen Flush touching this, that it could get all of the ink out of the pen. And bleach, as would be expected, completely removed it from the page, but there should be no need for a 1/3 bleach solution with this ink. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Diamine Ochre has a viscosity of 2.44, making it normal and coming up on average. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Diamine Ochre has an average dry time of 17 seconds, making it not only normal, but average. Now, let's look at the writing samples. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer spots of shading, not a ton of shading, like the OC is a little lighter than the H in Ochre, and then it gets a little darker. That was me smearing it up there. The extra fine is a slightly lighter tone with no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer a bunch of shading throughout, where the starts lighter and gets darker, quick starts lighter and gets darker. Brown has a light, dark, and then goes back to light, back to dark, back to light again, back to dark. It is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful in what it's doing. Over starts very light and gets very dark. Gorgeous stuff. 11 seconds to dry. Medium, same tone that we got with the extra fine, with no feather, spread, halo, sheen. Shading all over, the same type of shading that we got with the extra fine, where quick starts very dark, gets light, gets dark, gets light, gets dark, gets light, gets dark. It's beautiful. Beautiful stuff. Look at what's going on. It's like that camouflage kind of effect again with the brown, the light and dark, all just wow. The shading in this ink is fantastic, and the color is spot on. 16 seconds to dry for the medium. Now the extra fine and the medium scrubby show us some color variation. You have to look far left to far right. On both, the color variation here is not as much as I see in the writing sample, and the smear test, you could likely recover it if you smeared while you were writing. Tomoe River, no bleeding, we get ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shade. None there. Just a dark ochre color. Extra fine, slightly lighter tone with no feather, spread, halo sheen, and almost no shading at all. Barely noticeable. Fox is a little bit lighter and then gets a little darker. Quick is a little lighter and then gets a little darker. So there's some spots with a little bit of shading, but not a whole lot. I would barely call that some shading, but there is some. 18 seconds to dry. The medium is a darker tone, which strangely gave us the opportunity for more shade here. The medium had no feather, spread, halo sheen, and it had beautiful shading throughout. The starts as it's got a dark spot at the bottom on the hoop of the T, but the T starts light, and then it gets really dark into the over. Keeps doing that light to dark to light to dark inside the writing. It's beautiful stuff. Dog shows it off very well, where it's very light and it's dark in the upstroke, and it's light into or dark into the O, light out of the O, dark in the G. Part of the down swoop of the G is light. Gorgeous. 24 seconds to dry. Very worth it to me for this ink. Now the scrubby of the extra fine and the medium show us some color variation in the extra fine. Very little in the extra fine, but there is some. Look far left to far right. The medium shows us none, but we got more in the writing sample than we did in the scrubby. The smear test, I don't think you could recover it if you smeared while you were writing. Rhodia. Rhodia gives us no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, spread, halo sheen. It offers little bits of shading. The O in the ochre has a lighter right side, and then it gets dark and stays dark. Diamine is dark all the way, so there's a spot of shade. But other than that, not really. Extra fine is a very noticeably lighter tone with no feather, spread, halo sheen, and beautiful shading all through this writing. The starts light and gets dark quick. The Q has dark and light spots, and then it gets darker and it gets lighter at the C and dark back into the K. Brown starts dark and gets light. Fox starts light and gets dark. Beautiful. And 13 seconds to dry. Now the medium gets to be a darker tone with no feather, spread, halo sheen, and the shading is absolutely gorgeous here. Quick starts dark, gets light, gets dark, stays dark, gets light again, gets dark again. Wonderful. Fox starts light and gets dark. Over starts light, dark to light to dark. Beautiful stuff. 17 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine and the medium show us very little color variation. We got much more in the writing sample. And the smear test, you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing. So I test this with different toned paper like the yellow Rhodia. It has no bleeding, no ghosting. That was basically expected. But different toned papers have different effects on us, on what the ink does. Now, looking at the tone difference between the white and the yellow paper, we see that the 1.1 is unaffected. The extra fine's unaffected. The medium looks unaffected, but it looks like it's going to actually make those lighters, the lighter parts, stand out a little bit more. So the 1.1 is no feather, spread, halo sheen, and there's zero shading there to see at all. The extra fine is a very noticeably lighter tone. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen. I see no shading occurring here. The yellow paper ate up the shading on the extra fine. It took 13 seconds to dry. The medium, a noticeably darker tone than we got with the extra fine, with no feather, spread, halo sheen, and that shading is still there. It's gorgeous. The Q and quick is very dark. It goes to light, and then it works its way darker gradually. So the shading is occurring differently than it occurred on the white paper. Dog starts dark, gets light, stays light, and then the bottom loop of the G gets dark again. It's beautiful stuff. 17 seconds to dry. Again, the scrubby showed us almost no color variation, but we saw more up here in the medium. We saw none in the extra fine. The smear test, I still think you could recover it if you smeared while you were writing. So Limone, lots of bleed spots. It's not particularly good. Lots of show through. It does not make the back of the page unusable for everybody, unusable for me. It does not touch the page underneath. It doesn't actually make its way all the way through the page. The 1.1 has no spread, but it has feathering. Tiny feathers all over the place. It has no halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine is a slightly lighter tone, just barely lighter. The extra fine has little feathering. It makes the edges of some of the parts of words seem a little blurry. Like the bottom loop on the Q has got a bunch of those tiny little feathers. The K in quick has a bunch of those tiny little feathers. Over has a bunch of those tiny little feathers, and the has a bunch of the tiny little feathers, but that's about it. So it does feather in areas, but it's almost like it's selectively. No halo, sheen, or shade, 6 seconds to dry. The medium is a noticeably darker tone. The medium has some spread. The medium has some feathering, the same type of feathering that goes on. It's selective feathering. It's just in different spots. Like the B, R, and brown both have a whole bunch of those tiny little feathers, but not the rest of brown. The has tiny little feathers all over it, but not the, none of it doesn't have feathering. The E in over has a bunch of those tiny feathers, but not the rest of over. No halo, sheen, no shade, 9 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both showed us no color variation. We didn't expect it. We didn't get it. In the smear test, you could definitely recover it if you smeared while you were writing. Black and red notebook, no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine is a noticeably lighter tone, with no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade, 8 seconds to dry. The medium is a very noticeably darker tone, with no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade, 11 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both showed us no color variation, and we didn't get any color variation. And the smear test, you could not recover this one if you smeared on this paper. That is all that I have for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Diamine's Ochre, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I really wanted to put a blue with this, and I put what is one of my favorite blues, Robert Oster's School Blue. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Diamine's Ochre? Ochre is one of my favorite brown colors, and anybody who does painting realizes how useful as a color this can be. And this ink, to me, is a perfect representation of ochre as a color. If you like brown inks and you really want to experiment with a bunch of different brown inks, I think you should start here because this is a fantastic one. Thanks for watching.